I'm gonna have to use my indoor voice. I do usually have a pretty big voice. So is this okay for everybody? Is it hard to hear me? Okay. Thanks, Jan, for introducing me. And I have had the pleasure of working with Stan Roth for many years at the Biological Survey. And Jan and I met through my work with the formerly known as Jayhawk Audubon Society, which is now the Lawrence Bird Alliance. But that's how we first met. Pretty much when I first came to town here, I served as the treasurer for 20 some odd years before finally finding somebody else who wanted to take over that task, which is not easy. So I don't want this to be too terribly formal, although I feel like standing up here by nature, it's kind of formal. But I welcome anybody to just like raise hands or ask questions or just yell out. As Jan mentioned, I'm from the East Coast, so we tend to interrupt and yell and just say stuff whenever it kind of moves us. So feel free to do that. Yeah, as far as doing the slide.
I'll be glad to do that for you if you show me which one I'm supposed to push.
Which button you're supposed to, I don't know.
You know?
Which button you're supposed to push. I think you just do page down, probably. Right?
There you
go. Okay. Thank you. Thanks. So, the Kansas Natural Heritage Inventory is a program of the Kansas Biological Survey. Now we're known as the Kansas Biological Survey and Center for Ecological Research. And we're just right over there on West Campus. We have a little 1970s era building over there. And the Heritage Program has been part of the Biological Survey since the Heritage Program's inception in the late 1980s. And we've always maintained the same mission of collecting information about the state's rare plants, animals, and natural communities. And I'll use natural communities are pieces of the native landscape, and sometimes I call them ecosystems, and sometimes I call them natural communities. Really, in this talk, I'm going to talk more about animals than anything else, but just kind of keeping that in mind. So when we talk about the rare plants and animals, there are lots of different ways to think about rarity. And lots of people use it in different ways, and I think it's really important to be able to sort of define what we mean by that from our perspective. And our program assigns rarity ranks both at the state level. We've assigned rarity ranks for all of the plants of the state, most, maybe all of the vertebrates and a lot of invertebrates. And we rank according to rarity, which is the factors that we use when we think about rarity are the number of occurrences, the number of places on the ground where something occurs, the number of actual individuals there might be, because you could have, say, 10 occurrences, but each one only has maybe a breeding pair of something, and so that's not very many. But if you have 10 occurrences and each one is a population of 200, that's a different story. And then the range extent, whether something occurs just in a small part of the state or is much more widespread. Population trends, always a little hard to get a handle oftentimes on population trends because we don't have very good data on that, but if we do, that goes into thinking about rarity. And then habitat specificity, how particular something is to a particular habitat type. Within Kansas, then, we rank at what we call the S rank, the state rank, which is using all of those rank factors, how rare something is just in Kansas. And the ranking goes from 1 to 5, with 1 being the most rare, 5 being common. Then all of those plants and animals are also ranked at what we call the global scale, which is the range-wide scale. So we're interested, thinking about the geography of rarity, we're interested in how rare something is within the state and how rare it is within its entire range. And those have important complications for, important considerations for how we think about conservation. Okay. So who assigns ranks? This is a heritage program. Craig Freeman, some of you may know him. He's the curator of the herbarium here at KU, and he assigns the rarity ranks for all the plants of the state. And Kelly Kincher, he's our plant community ecologist, and he assigns ranks for natural communities. So that's Craig is top left on your side, and then under Craig is Kelly, and then on the top right is Bill Busby. He's retired now, but he was our heritage program zoologist, and then me. So we, as a group, have assigned the rarity ranks for within plants and animals within the state ranks. And then we also, our heritage program belongs to a network of heritage programs that occurs throughout all of North America, both in the US and in Canada. And we all do the same job within our jurisdiction. So every state has a state heritage program that ranks their species, assigns those S ranks, those state rarity ranks, and then we kind of all work together to provide data on a larger scale. Okay. So just a couple examples. I showed up on the screen, but I didn't talk about it. The squirrel, the eastern fox squirrel, and how that was ranked. We all know they're not rare here, and they're not rare throughout their entire range. So that would be given a state rarity rank of 5, which means it's really common, and a global rarity rank of 5, meaning it's really common. The black-footed ferret, some of you may be familiar with this species. It's an endangered species, and there's only one population in Kansas, and that's actually a reintroduction, because most of it had been extirpated entirely from the state. It had been extirpated entirely from its entire range. Now there's one spot in Kansas where they've been reintroduced. So within the state, it's very rare, and it's a federally endangered species. Globally, within its entire range, it's also very rare. So that would get a rank of S1, G1. And then this is a different type of example from something that's most really common everywhere. We had something that's really rare everywhere. This is a species, I just kind of picked this one because I thought he was a little cute, kind of a little cute cave salamander. There aren't very many in the state. They are very habitat specific, and I'll just see if I can, it's not a very good map, I'm sorry, I'm supposed to be a geographer, but it's not a good map. They occur down in the far southeast part of the state of Kansas. That's the only place where they occur in the state. So within the state, they're really rare, but they occur in a pretty wide range. So globally, they're quite common. Okay. So looking at how we rank things then, we have over 700 taxa of vascular plants that are ranked either S1 or S2. So those are our rarest plants. And then 203 animal species and 67 natural community types. I'm not going to say anything more about that right now. And this just is a kind of an overall map of where things are. The size of the features on there is not really particularly relevant right now, but it just kind of gives you an idea of geographically where the rare things are throughout the state. We have down in southeast Kansas, there's quite a bit of rarity there, and I'll talk about some of the reasons for that. And this also shows down here in southwest Kansas a lot of rarity, and part of this is also is due to where we've actually done survey work. Obviously, a good part of the state, most of the state is under private ownership, and we have ended up doing a lot of survey work in places that are more publicly owned, and that's the cimarron grasslands down there.
Can you read what the colors designate?
Okay, sure. The blue are for animals, and the orange color, which doesn't show itself very well, is plant communities, and the green is for plants. We have a lot of information on rare plants. People have been botanizing in the state for decades, for 100 years, more than 100 years actually now. So we have a lot of historical information on rare plants. And maybe this would be a good time for me to tell you about where we get the information that we then use to create this map. The Kansas Biological Survey, doesn't do very much biological surveying anymore. We really rely on a whole community throughout the state to provide data. So we get a lot of data through the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks, through other researchers throughout the state, and through museums. So whenever somebody collects a specimen of something and deposits it into a museum collection, then we can have access to that. And we use all of that to create this map. So I want to talk about the different reasons that things are rare. And I showed those ranking factors, and I talked about that cave salamander. And that salamander occurs down here in the Ozark Plateau, which only is a little tiny bit of Kansas. This is physiographic provinces, so large landforms, landscapes, and the Ozark Plateau stretches into Oklahoma and Arkansas and Missouri. And species that are found there are more common, are something like the cave salamander, which only occurs in the Ozark Plateau, and that little spot in Kansas occurs in much wider landscapes because that type of physiographic province extends much further out than just where you find it in Kansas. So there are some species in Kansas that are rare just because they were always rare, because the type of habitat, the type of conditions that they need is rare in the state. And we have a lot of amphibians, particularly, that occur just down in the southeast part of the state. They never were common here, and they never will be, no matter what we do. Okay. Then there are other species that are, you can ask a question if you wanted to, or
No, I was just, on the slide back one, I thought this area was glaciated, but we're not then, according to those counties.
It stops at the Walker's River, or a little bit south of that.
Okay. See, I thought we already.
What did you answer, Ken?
It stops, there's some glacial erratics south of the Walker's River, just a little bit, but basically it's that river valley. Not so far.
So this is a land cover map, fairly recent, 2023, and everything that's in brown is cultivated ground. And on the eastern side of the state, yellow designates hayfields, and in most cases those hayfields are non-native grass. So they've been converted from prairie to a non-native grass species composition. And then the light tan color, that's the native grassland. And so this kind of shows us why we have a different kind of rarity, just from habitat loss. So rather than species that just never were very common in the state, we have a lot that were more common, but because of habitat loss, we don't have very many of them anymore. And the lesser prairie chicken is a good example of that particular species that occurs in the western part of the state. And if you look at western Kansas, a good amount of that has been cultivated, and so we've lost that habitat for prairie chickens and other species that are dependent on that type of grassland habitat. So that's a different type of rarity, one of course, which is much more concerning.
So if you looked at this 10 years before, it would be, it's kind of getting worse? Or do you know?
So much land conversion happened a long time ago. It may be getting worse, but incrementally,
A little bit.
it's just little by little, right? And it's most concerning because we have converted so much that all those little amounts really matter. And that's one thing I guess we can talk a little bit about when we talk about Douglas County. Is, you know, land conversion has been taking place in the state since Europeans moved here, but it's happening continually and continually, so.
Can you point out the?
Yeah. The red, those are the urban areas.
Can you point out the light tan that is native prairie? I can't.
Where the Flint Hills is.
So, yeah, right here, this,
Okay.
and that, yes, that's the Flint Hills landscape there. So really, there's only 3 or maybe 4 major color schemes here, which is all the dark brown, which is the cultivated area, this light tan color, and then kind of the yellowish color. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. It just looked green from back here.
It does, okay. And so this area here is the Red Hills. That's another landscape that's fairly intact. Quite beautiful. Okay. So then I really want to talk about another type of rarity, or why some certain species are on our rare species list. And that's because we don't really know anything about them. So we will call something rare because we don't have very much data, and we may have just a few examples in museum collections of something, and we will call it rare until we get some more information that tells us that it's more common. And so I'd like to talk about a few of those and give some examples of what they look like and kind of the groups that they represent. I like to point. So, who knows anything about underwing moths? Nobody does.
Is that milkweed it's on?
That is a milkweed that it's on, but that's not what it needs. So there's a group of moths, and I just picked these. So I've been doing some investigation. Some years ago, we, with the help of some people, added a bunch of new species to what we call the tracking list. So those are the rare species that we're interested in gaining more information on.
Is it like the lead plant?
It does like the lead plant. So they're this group of moths, and they're called underwing moths. And yes, there's at least 3. Their host plant is lead plant, or it's actually plants in the genus Amorpha, which I think also includes Amorpha nana and Amorpha fruticosa. But I think we're more familiar with lead plant, which is a prairie plant. And so this, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9 locations of, this is for 3 moths, 3 underwing moths altogether. I have 9 locations for them. So they're not very common as far as we know, but my understanding is that we should be able to find those wherever we find Amorpha. Amorpha, lead plant, occurs in native prairies. So thinking back to the land cover map, the Flint Hills is native prairie, the Red Hills is native prairie, there's, in the Smoky Hills, there's native prairie, there's a lot of native prairie. And actually, these locations occur in the Flint Hills and the Red Hills and the Smoky Hills. That's in the Rookery Breaks. I don't know what that one's doing up there, but so it has a wide distribution. We just don't know of where very many are. This one over here in Johnson County is at a private person's little tiny piece of prairie that's, I think it's like maybe 2 acres or something. And so they occur throughout the state, but we just don't have very many records of them. That's one example. These are things that I've just been investigating, so they kind of get me excited. Dung beetles, everybody loves dung beetles. There are a bunch of different dung beetles. And I just have this particular one here, and I don't even try to pronounce that name. If somebody wants to do that, they can. You want to pronounce that name?
What?
Yes, yeah. So just for this particular one, dung beetle, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 locations. Now these, there's a whole bunch of dung beetles that are associated with burrowing mammals. And this particular one, as far as we know, is only associated with prairie dog towns. But there are other dung beetles that are associated with other burrowing mammals like pocket gophers and kangaroo rats and others. And some of them are more specific to a particular type of burrow and some are not. Now, if you know anything about prairie dogs, you know that they're not really all that popular in the state, and we've done a pretty good job of eradicating them. So as we go and eradicate prairie dogs and prairie dog burrows, and most importantly, prairie dog dung, we're going to be losing some of these beetles. These are examples of species that we've never known very much about. And so how do we know if we're actually losing them? Because we only have these few occurrences. It could be more widespread or it could not. And we just don't know what's happening with them.
Do you mean we as in like
We.
Kansas?
Very
or,
good.
Or everybody?
Both, right. So I always talk specifically about Kansas. It could be in other states that their biologists know more about things, but I'll say a little bit about something that relates to that a little bit later on. When I talk about we, I'm mostly talking about biologists in the state of Kansas. And there could be people who know things that I don't know. Okay. Bees, we hear a lot about bees. There's a lot of different kinds of bees. There's bumblebees and sweat bees and carpenter bees and lots of different kinds of bees and honeybees, of course, and which are not native. But people are, of course, very interested in bees and actually are trying to get a better handle on what's out there. This particular one, centris, I have 2 locations for it. This is what's called an oil collecting bee. It collects oils from flowers and brings that back to its nest. And so this is a beautiful place, Great Basin Prairie Preserve out here in western Kansas. These are the only 2 places where there's any documentation of that particular bee occurring. Okay. And one more example. This is called the Kansas fairy shrimp. And as far as we know, it only occurs in Kansas, in Nebraska. And this was identified and described by one of my colleagues who was at the Biological Survey and some of his co-workers. And it occurs at Cheyenne Bottoms. The place where it was first described from, the place where it was first identified and as a species, new species, was down near Wichita And there's an X there because that location is gone.
Mm.
So we know of it from the Cheyenne Bottoms and one place up in Nebraska. So that would be going back to thinking about the ranking. That's rare in Kansas, rare throughout its entire range. But it's a fairy shrimp. It's not hard to find. So that's another one that it takes real specialized skills in order to be able to do surveys for them. Maybe there are more of them out there, probably, but we just don't know. Okay. So I'm going to talk just real briefly. I'll just show you a few maps.
Sorry, can I interrupt?
Yes.
Can you pull the projector back to just lower
Good
that
idea.
figure? Move closer. I thought that might be helpful for everybody.
You're right.
Oh, yeah.
No, you're right. There you go. Oh, that's good. So I mentioned that we're part of this network of heritage programs. It's called the NatureServe Network. And by participating in that network, our data for Kansas is used for larger scale conservation work. And this is one product that was created by NatureServe that's called the Map of Biodiversity Importance. And of course, I never really like to show this because it makes it look like Kansas isn't very important, because here we are, and you see the darker colors are where there's higher biodiversity importance. I don't really like that too much. It makes me kind of feel like, oh, people in California have it all, but in Florida. So the darker colors are areas where there's more documented biodiversity of rare species. So the map is based on species that are ranked G1 and G2, so globally very rare, and it only really includes plants and vertebrates, a few invertebrates like mussels, but not a lot of the kinds of things that I've been talking about. The invertebrate, it's the insects, spiders, because some of those don't even have a global status rank. This map is based on global statuses. A lot of those aren't even ranked at the global scale because we don't know very much about them. So there's all that biodiversity that's not being included in a map like this. Now, the geographic patterns of having higher, showing greater areas of biodiversity importance in California, the patterns would hold no matter what, because of the landscapes, the geography, the speciation that occurs in some places versus others. But the point that I want to make is that there's a lot that we don't know, that even when we work on a map like this, there are a lot of data gaps. Okay. The data that we collect is available to be used by others, either researchers, individuals, but not at a real precise level, because most of the data that we have, or a lot of the data that we have, occurs on private land, and we're not sharing that kind of information generally to the public. But if you were interested in knowing, for example, we have this rare plant that's called Mead's milkweed, and if you're interested in knowing where Mead's milkweed occurs and how Kansas ranks as far as where it sits in its geographic range, you could pull up a map on this application that's called NatureServe Explorer and NatureServe Explorer Pro, and you could get a map that shows these little, not all that clear, but there are some hexagons here that show the distribution of Mead's milkweed. And so that's that's information that is available to anybody if you're interested in doing a little bit of research on the distribution of plants and animals. Looking at Kansas, is anybody familiar with the State Wildlife Action Plan? Has anybody had any interaction with that? That is the guiding document for Kansas conservation. And it's put together by Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks with the input of a lot of different agencies, and the public also has the opportunity to provide input into the State Wildlife Action Plan. So there are 428 species that are considered species of greatest conservation need, and that's what directs, this is talking about non-game species, that's what directs the non-game section of Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks as far as what kind of programs, surveys, and actions they undertake. So for the most part, if you're talking non-game species, those 428 species of greatest conservation needs are the target species. Obviously, they can't work on 428 species all at once, but if it's not on that list, then the department is probably not going to be working on it at all. So Wildlife and Parks is in the process right now of revising this plan, and there will be a call for public input coming up sometime later this winter or in the spring, and so I can let you know about that when that comes up. And then I'll talk real briefly too about the work that we have been doing locally. This map shows little dots of pieces of prairie that occur in Douglas County. And we've been surveying native prairie in the county since the inception of our program back in the late 1980s. And we've actually conducted 3 comprehensive surveys over that time period to document the loss of native prairie in the county. And we've been working with the Douglas County Heritage Conservation Council and the Planning Department, talking about providing data on native prairie, and then also talking about what kind of conservation actions can take place. And I think that's something that anybody in the county can be thinking about, and thinking about how we can go forward with conserving what remains of the native prairie that occurs in the county. And I think this is really my last slide. Just want to mention a few things that people can do, because sometimes things always seem so daunting. But for those who like to get out in the field, there are citizen science platforms that can be used to document species. And I've been going through some of those citizen science databases to find records of some of these rare species. Some of these, the dung beetles and the underwing moths, I've actually found records in the citizen science platforms. People go out and they take pictures of things and they upload it to iNaturalist, and then there's a community of others who help to identify those. And so that's one way that people can actually contribute to the database. And then I mentioned the State Wildlife Action Plan as being in the process of revision, and that's something that folks can also take a look at and see if you have any input to make on that. And then locally, being involved in whatever the county is doing regarding the open space plan, and just kind of being aware of any kind of opportunities for protection of native prairie. The last slide is just going to be a couple things about us at the Biological Survey. We do have ecology seminars, and they're just right over there across the road on Fridays. And if you go to our website, you can find out what those seminars are going to be about. And we also have YouTube recordings of them. So you can just, even if you haven't gotten over there, you can go to YouTube and see what might be interesting there. And then at the field station, we have Science Sundays. Has anybody gone to any of those? Yeah. Those, you do, space is limited, and so if you're interested in going to those, you do have to RSVP, sign up for it, and they do get kind of full. So if you're interested in going to any of those, then you want to go ahead and sign up for those as soon as you can.
The next one is actually on prairie chickens.
Oh, is it, who's giving that?
I can't remember, it got moved to February because of the weather. So I
Okay.
don't know if there are any spots open still.
Okay, great, thanks. So that's all I have to say, oh, except that we did, I mentioned that we worked with the Douglas County Heritage Conservation Council on a project several years ago. And so we created these little booklets that are called Discovering Our Natural Heritage, Prairies and Forests of Douglas County. And it's just kind of a little popular booklet about prairies and forests of Douglas County. And I've brought some over here that you're welcome to take with you, or if you know of anybody else that might want to have them, you can take more than one. And I'll take any questions that you might have.
Jennifer, the Kansas for Conservation, which is a new organization that's being formed, are you all participating
I
in
don't
that?
know anything about it.
Really?
Yeah. Who's,
Well, there's about 40 different organizations. We're trying to catch up with all the surrounding states and dedicating in the state budget money for conservation, mostly in the public access areas. So they're only in their second year and they're gaining steam. And it's a wide variety. I mean, we've got the Farm Bureau and Farmers Union in the same room, which is amazing.
yeah, that's really amazing,
And,
that's great.
So anyway, that's.
And it may be that some of my colleagues from the Biological Survey are involved in that. I just personally am not.
Well, lettuce
privy.
is a part of that, so they
Yeah.
have nonprofits of all sorts, from oil companies to lettuce.
That's great. Well, one of the things that, I don't know if this is, I'll just give you this little bit of information, but the Kansas Biological Survey, we don't actually receive any state funding to do survey work, which is why we rely on all of our partners to do the survey work. It used to be that we did a lot of survey work, way back when. We've been around since the early 1900s, but we are not in the state budget. We don't get any funding from the state budget to do survey work. We are not only a unit of the university, but we are also a state agency. But our mandate, which is to document, I'll just paraphrase and say to document the biodiversity of the state of Kansas, is totally unfunded. And so if there's some way that we can work with any other organization or anything to try to see if we can get the legislature to actually put us in the budget as a line item, that would be a good thing. I know it's not gonna happen, but we're gonna try. Yes.
How do you go about I'm gonna pick on prairies, so how do you go about finding the prairies or the remnant of the old prairies in this area? Is it word of mouth? Somebody calls your office and says, we've got prairie, we've got restored prairie, out where we live, we've got a person with prairie that has never been touched or tilled.
So how have we found,
And how, yeah.
in order to create that map, where did all of that information come from? We drove every road in the county. We have driven every road in the county initially, back in the late 1980s, and in 2004, 2005, we drove all the roads to identify all the prairies. So we found all the ones that you can see from the road. There could be others that you can't see from the road that were not included in our map, because if you couldn't see it from the road, we wouldn't know about it unless somebody actually contacted us. So now we actually work quite a bit with the county planning department to talk about prairie conservation. And if they find out, if they meet with a landowner and find out that that landowner has prairie, then that landowner might actually contact us then and tell us too, oh, we've got prairie, could you come out and look at it, could you assess its condition or something like that. So initially it started with just doing the roadside surveys, and then it went into word of mouth over the decades. Do you have prairie? You do? Oh,
Restored.
okay.
But we have another neighbor, well, down the road that his is
Natural.
His is natural, yeah.
Back to Hammers.
We actually, oh, Mentahamers, oh yeah, we've worked with him quite a bit. Yes, great, yeah, great guy. And very interested in conservation work. And yes, he's somebody who did reach out to us and talk about how he can maintain his prairie in good condition. We don't keep track of restorations. Any more questions?
She said
We don't keep track of restorations, yeah.
Is there a lot of restoration going on, you think, yeah?
Small scale, as far as like, highly diverse restorations, I don't really know, there could be a lot of stuff going on. I actually did one, I don't really call it a restoration, I call it a recreation, because the area had been plowed at one time, and so it's not really restored prairie as much as just a recreated prairie. I did one through USDA, the Department of Ag EQIP program, and they can provide some cost share for landowners who are interested in doing some kind of native plantings. And there are people like that in the county, I just don't have a record of those. They tend to be pretty small scale because they're very expensive.
So would you consider an area that's never been plowed and then goes back to a prairie, through that conservation plan restored or reinvented?
Well, in general parlance, we call it restored. I have a little bit of issue with that because it really is just starting over. Once you destroy all of the soil microorganisms, everything else that's occurring, it's not just about the plants, it's about the entire community. That includes all this below ground stuff, and we're not really restoring that for the most part. So I call it a recreation.
I was wondering, I was involved with kind of monitoring the Prairie Park prairie.
Yeah.
It was sprayed and it has, it's intact. It's never been plowed. And so, it's continuous in terms of the microorganisms since, 9,000, 10,000 years ago. And so has anybody taken those types of samples from intact, unplowed prairies and are looking at that very closely in any of the prairies?
Not that I know of, but it is something that I've been thinking a lot about and something that I need to follow up on, because actually over where I work at the Biological Survey, we have a lot of soil scientists. We have a lot of people who are looking at soils as they relate to climate change. And so I would be interested in actually trying to gather some of that information and see how we can relate that to the soil communities of native versus something that's been recreated, and actually get some real good data on that. And you had a question?
I did. How would you, we've always been impressed with Missouri's public access conservation programs, even though the state is kind of backward in a lot of ways. But how would you compare the funding mechanism in Missouri with Kansas, and why do we not seem to be able to accomplish the same things that they do?
Well, I do want to mention that that's something that's really interesting to me right now. The Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks recently, there was recently appointed a new secretary for the department. Brad Lovelace had been KDWP secretary. He retired, and was replaced with somebody who's from Missouri.
Mm.
And so I was at a meeting in October of this Kansas Non-Game Wildlife Advisory Council, and Chris Kennedy is his name. He was there, and he was asking that same question, because he came from Missouri. And he's like, how come in Missouri, we have all this money and all these funding mechanisms, and here, we have no money?
Right, right.
I can't answer that. It's just, Missouri voted that in a long time ago, and.
Yeah, I knew that they put a levy in, for hunters and so forth,
It's not just for hunters. So
If you
we
have time,
money
I
for-
can answer all your questions.
Okay.
Okay, we have money for hunters.
Right,
What we don't have is money for non-game
Okay,
and
right,
public access.
right.
Yeah.
No, I can answer that a little bit for you.
Please.
Kansas for Conservation, that Thad was talking
Mhm.
about, well, they're trying to do similar things that's happening in Missouri.
Mm.
The main thing they're trying to do is propose 60 million out of the general fund for Kansas for conservation. And that'd go into a broad, area, a broad thing, and then they'll set up a committee. People will send grants in to get some of that money from that. Missouri has two mechanisms. We had a guy from Missouri that was in charge of that give a lecture in the summer on that. And he said that half of the money comes from its sales tax that's based into the Constitution. They have a part of it that's already in the Constitution, they get a certain sales tax. The other, they have to fight for every year, and since 1980, they always got funded because they make an active effort to take all these representatives out fishing, hunting and whatever down the rivers in Missouri, and show them how this is really important for the state, and they always vote for that extra money, which is the other half. So they have a lot of money because of those two things. And that's what Kansas Conservation we're gonna start now, because there's no general fund for conservation at all, in the state. There is in Nebraska, they started that, there is in Missouri, there is in, surrounding states who are trying to get that passed. And one of the issues was that, people were worried, or Republicans were worried about, that this was a land grab
Right.
for, 30-30, stuff like this, and so they had to write in that none of this money can be spent on buying land if you are a state agency. But for private company can apply for money, like Ducks Unlimited or whatever can do that, then they could do that. Anyway, it's
That's
happening now, so it's an interesting.
Yeah, it is.
Exciting. Anybody else have any other comments or questions? Okay, great.